The city was quiet. Not the kind of quiet that came after a long day. Not the peaceful silence of safety earned. This was the silence of people who had learned when not to speak, when not to look up, when not to ask questions that might need answers. The streetlights hummed. Traffic moved in orderly lines. No horns, no shouting. The pedestrians walked with purpose, eyes forward, hands visible. Clean sidewalks. No graffiti, no broken windows. Perfect. That was the word the broadcasts used. A perfect city. Order restored. Peace maintained. Batman stood on a rooftop 3 blocks from the central plaza and watched the patrols move below, red and blue, the colors that used to mean hope. Now they meant something else. Compliance officers. Regime soldiers wearing the symbols of heroes. He'd stopped counting how many cities looked like this. The extraction point was 2 streets over. 3 civilians waiting in a condemned building. The insurgency had pulled them out of holding before the charges went through. Thought crimes. Sedition. The old laws didn't use those words, but the new ones did. Batman's comm crackled. "We're clear," a voice said. One of his people, young, tired. They were all tired. "Building's empty. Target group is secure." "Confirm exit route," Batman said. "Confirmed. We're moving now." He should have felt relief. 3 more people who wouldn't disappear into the system. 3 more families who might see each other again. He felt nothing. The plaza below erupted with light. Not an explosion, worse. A column of white-blue energy humming with a frequency that made his teeth ache even from this distance. The air twisted around it. Reality bending like heat waves off summer asphalt. A phantom zone projector. Batman's hand went to his grapnel. Too far. He was too far. The condemned building. The one his people were in. The projector's beam swept across the structure. Not a weapon. Not a bomb. Something cleaner. More efficient. The kind of technology that Kryptonians brought to Earth and humans learned to weaponize. 3 figures appeared in the plaza. Regime officers in tactical gear carrying the projector between them on a mobile platform. They'd been waiting, watching. The building's walls didn't collapse. The windows didn't shatter. Everything stayed exactly as it was. Except the people inside were gone. No bodies, no blood, no evidence. Just empty space where 5 human beings had been standing 3 seconds ago. Batman's comm was silent. No screams, no static. They hadn't even had time to transmit. One of the officers below checked a handheld scanner, nodded, spoke into his own comm. The projector powered down with the descending whine. They packed up, loaded the equipment back onto their transport. Professional, efficient. They'd done this before. The transport lifted off anti-grav thrusters barely louder than the traffic around it. Batman stood on the rooftop and stared at the building where 5 people had been. Where they should still be. Where the laws of physics said they had to be somewhere. But they weren't. The Phantom Zone wasn't new. Superman had used it before. For criminals, for threats, for people who couldn't be contained by normal means. Zod, Doomsday, things that would break out of any prison humanity could build. Now it was used for thought crimes. Batman's jaw tightened. The city stayed quiet. The traffic kept moving. The pedestrians didn't look up at the building. They'd learned not to. Looking meant seeing. Seeing meant knowing. Knowing meant choosing. And choosing meant risk. He pulled back from the edge. The grapnel stayed holstered. There was nothing to extract. anyone to save. Just another empty space where people used to be. His comm crackled again. Different frequency, encrypted 6 layers deep. Batman. Constantine's voice, rough, like he'd been drinking or hadn't slept. Probably both. We need to talk. Not now. Yeah, now. I've got something. Something that might actually work. Batman closed his eyes. Constantine's solutions tended to make things worse before they made them better. If they made them better at all. What kind of something? The kind that doesn't play by their rules. The kind that looks at a phantom zone projector and tells it to go fuck itself. Magic. Surprised you can say the word without choking. Batman opened his eyes. The city spread out below him. Perfect, orderly, quiet. A prison that looked like peace. Where? He said. Tower of Fate, neutral ground. Fate's already pissed at me, so that's a bonus. When? Soon as you can get here. We're running out of time, mate. Superman's getting better at this. More efficient. Yesterday it was 5 people. Tomorrow it'll be 50. And the day after that, it'll be anyone who asks the wrong question. The line went dead. Batman stood on the rooftop and looked at the empty building one more time. 5 people. Gone. No trial, no appeal. No record except the hole they left behind in the world. He thought about the word Constantine used. Magic. The thing he'd spent his entire career avoiding. The thing that broke rules instead of following them. The thing that might be the only option left. Batman activated his grapnel and fired into the dark. Behind him, the city stayed quiet. Perfect. The Tower of Fate existed in the spaces between places. Not hidden, not cloaked. Simply outside the framework of normal geography. You didn't travel to it. You were allowed in. Batman materialized in the entrance hall and immediately felt wrong. The air was too still. The walls hummed with a frequency just below hearing. Golden light filtered through windows that looked out onto nothing. Or everything. It was hard to tell. Constantine stood near a large circular table covered in open books, chalk diagrams, and what looked like the remains of 3 different containment circles. He held a cigarette in one hand and a flask in the other. Neither looked like they'd helped. "You look terrible," Batman said. "Thanks, mate. You're a real pick-me-up." Dr. Fate stood on the far side of the room, arms crossed the golden helm reflecting light that didn't have a source. The presence behind the mask felt vast, patient, and deeply unhappy. "This is a mistake," Fate said. His voice carried harmonics that made Batman's skull ache. "The barriers between worlds are already thin. What you're proposing will weaken them further." "What he's proposing," Batman said, looking at Constantine, "hasn't been explained yet." Constantine took a long drag from the cigarette. Let the smoke out slow. "Right. Here's the thing. You want to stop Superman. Can't do it with strength. Can't do it with tech. Can't do it with good intentions and clever plans. You've tried all that. So has everyone else. Regime's too entrenched. Too powerful. And Superman's not exactly listening to reason these days. Get to the point. The point is leverage. You need something he can't control. Something that doesn't play by the rules he's written. Something that looks at his perfect little system and tells him to shove it." Batman's eyes narrowed. "You want to summon something?" "Not something. Someone. A being powerful enough to make Superman think twice. Someone who understands what it means to impose order through strength. Someone who's done it before and knows exactly why it fails." "No. Fate's voice cut through the room like a blade. You cannot bring such an entity here. The balance is already fractured. This world teeters on the edge of tyranny. Introducing an outside force of that magnitude will not restore equilibrium. It will shatter what remains. Equilibrium. Constantine laughed. It wasn't a pleasant sound. Mate, the balance is already fucked. Superman's running a police state. People disappear for thinking the wrong thoughts. The Phantom Zone's a political prison now. Where's the equilibrium in that? The systems of this world must resolve their own conflicts. Intervention from beyond will give us a fighting chance. Constantine ground out the cigarette on the table. I'm not talking about summoning a demon to fight our battles. I'm talking about bringing in someone who can show both sides what they've become. A mirror. A consequence. Batman processed this. Constantine dealt in half-truths and desperate gambits, but he rarely suggested something this extreme without cause. What kind of being are you talking about? Constantine pulled a worn leather journal from his coat, flipped it open to a page marked with dried blood. Demon King class entity. Someone who ended a war by becoming powerful enough that continuing it was pointless. Someone who understands the cost of peace bought with fear. He looked up. And someone who won't take orders from either side. That's not reassuring. It's not supposed to be. You want reassurance? Go back to your cave and build another contingency plan that won't work. Constantine's expression hardened. I'm offering you something that might actually change the game. But it's not clean. It's not safe. And there's a very real chance it makes things worse before it makes them better. Batman looked at Fate. The golden helm reflected his own face back at him. You know what he's planning, Batman said. Specifically, I know the ritual he intends to use. I know the parameters he has set. And I know that the membrane between realities has been damaged by recent events. The summoning will not bind to the intended target. The resonance is wrong. Constantine frowned. What do you mean wrong? You seek to call a demon king who ended conflict through overwhelming force. But the ritual matrix has been compromised. Your anchor points are flawed. You're using a framework connected to Trigon's domain, and I have placed wards specifically to prevent his influence from bleeding through. That's the point. I'm not calling Trigon. I'm using the conceptual space he occupies. King-tier demon who imposed order. That's the search parameter. And the wards will deflect it. Fate's voice carried absolute certainty. The summoning will reach beyond your intended target. It will find something that matches the conceptual requirement, but exists outside the framework you expect. Something that achieved peace through dominance. Something that understands tyranny from both sides. Constantine went still. You're saying the ritual will still work, just not the way I planned. I am saying you will call something into this world. Whether it is what you want is another matter entirely. Batman watched Constantine's face, saw the calculation happening behind the bloodshot eyes, the weighing of terrible options against worse outcomes. Will it be hostile? Batman asked. Unknown, Fate said. But it will be powerful. And it will not be bound by your intentions or controlled by your will. You will have brought it here. What it chooses to do after that is not within your ability to determine. The room fell silent except for the strange ambient hum of the tower. Batman thought about 5 people vanishing from a condemned building. Thought about the projector's clean white light. Thought about the word perfect and how much he'd grown to hate it. How powerful? He asked. Constantine smiled. It looked like a wound. Powerful enough to make Superman realize he's not the scariest thing on the board anymore. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I've got. This isn't science, mate. It's not predictable. You're asking me to calculate the exact yield of something I've never seen explode. Best I can tell you is it'll make an impact. Fate turned toward Batman. The helm's golden surface seemed to pulse. You stand at a choice dark night. One path leads to uncertain salvation through methods you despise. The other leads to continued suffering under a system you cannot break. But know this, if you permit this summoning, you accept responsibility for everything that follows. Every consequence, every unintended result. You cannot claim ignorance or necessity as absolution. Batman met the Golden Helm's eyeless gaze. He thought about Dick, about the choices that led here, about the moment Superman decided the world needed a firmer hand and no one could stop him. He thought about the Phantom Zone projector and how quiet the city had become. "Do it," he said. Constantine didn't move. "You sure? Because there's no takebacks on this. Once we start, we finish. And whatever walks out of that circle is going to do what it wants. We don't get to control it. I don't want to control it. I want Superman to face something he can't intimidate, can't overpower, and can't make disappear. You might get your wish, or you might get something worse. Then we deal with that when it happens." Constantine looked at Fate. "You going to stop us?" "No." The word carried a weight of resignation. "You have been warned. You proceed with knowledge of the risk. The balance acknowledges your choice, even as it prepares for the consequences." Constantine nodded slowly, set down the flask, rolled up his sleeves. "Right then. Let's call up a Demon King and see what happens." He began drawing symbols on the floor with chalk that glowed faintly blue. The marks didn't look like any language Batman recognized. They hurt to look at directly. Fate raised one hand. Golden light spiraled from his palm, forming intricate geometric patterns in the air. Wards, reinforcements, a cage of divine order meant to redirect whatever came through. "The anchor is set," Fate said. "Your ritual will not call Trigon, but it will call through the space he occupies. The search parameter is established. A being who ended war through dominance. A king who imposed peace through strength and later questioned its worth." Constantine finished the last symbol, stepped back. The circle was complete. "Here we go." He spoke words that made Batman's ears ring. Latin, but older, twisted. The kind of language that predated the concept of good and evil and dealt only in raw transactions of power. The air inside the circle began to shimmer. Not heat, something else. Reality thinning like worn fabric. Fate's wards pulsed brighter, redirecting, deflecting, pushing the summoning away from its intended target and towards something else. Something that fit the parameters but existed outside the expected framework. The shimmer became a tear. Not violent, precise, surgical. Like someone had cut a doorway through the fundamental structure of existence. A figure stepped through. He wasn't tall, wasn't imposing, wasn't radiating power or menace. He simply stood there in a dark coat, hands at his sides, crimson eyes taking in the room, with the kind of calm that came from absolute certainty. The tears sealed behind him. The ritual circle went dark. Constantine stared. Fate's helm tilted slightly as if reassessing. Batman's hand moved toward his utility belt and stopped, not because he was afraid. because every instinct he'd honed over decades of fighting told him that reaching for a weapon right now would be the worst decision he'd ever made. The figure's gaze moved from Constantine to Fate to Batman. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, measured, the tone of someone stating simple facts. I am Anos Voldigoad. You summoned me for a purpose. Explain. Constantine found his voice first. Right. Yes. Okay, we need your help. There's a situation, a tyrant, someone who's taken control through overwhelming power and calls it peace. You need a weapon, Anos said. Someone to kill your enemy. Well, when you put it like that, I do not take contracts. I do not serve causes. If you called me here to be your assassin, you have wasted both our time. The temperature in the room dropped. Not physically, something deeper. Batman stepped forward. We're not asking you to kill anyone. We're asking you to help us expose a system that's destroying lives in the name of order. Anos looked at him. Those red eyes held something Batman couldn't quite name. Not malice, not compassion, judgment. A system, Anos said slowly, built on fear disguised as protection. Order maintained through the threat of erasure. Tell me, Dark Knight, how long has this tyrant ruled? Long enough. And how many have you saved? The question landed like a physical blow. Not enough, Batman said. Anos was silent for a moment. Then he turned toward the window that looked out onto nothing. Show me, he said. Show me this world you claim needs judgment, and I will decide whether your system deserves to stand or fall. Constantine let out a breath he'd been holding. That's it. No demands, no price. Anos glanced back. There is always a price, but it will not be paid to me. He walked toward the window, stopped at the threshold. If what you say is true, then this world has already chosen tyranny over chaos. My presence will not save you. It will only reveal what you have already become. The window opened. Not onto nothing, onto everywhere. Anos stepped through and vanished. Fate lowered his hand. The wards faded. It has begun, he said. May we all survive the truth he brings. Batman stared at the empty window. Constantine picked up his flask, drank, lowered it. Well, he said, that went about as well as I expected. Batman didn't answer. He was already calculating contingencies for something he suspected couldn't be contained. And somewhere in the city below, Superman's perfect order was about to meet something it had never encountered before. Consequence. Anos walked through the city and saw the lie immediately. The streets were clean. The buildings stood tall and unmarked. People moved with purpose, their faces neutral, their paths efficient. No crime, no disorder, no visible suffering. But the silence told a different story. It wasn't the absence of sound. Traffic hummed. Conversations murmured. Life continued in all its mundane rhythms. What was missing was something deeper. The particular quality of noise that came from people who believed they had choices. He passed a corner where 3 compliance officers stood watching the crowd. Red and blue uniforms, the symbol of hope repurposed into authority. They didn't need to do anything. Their presence was sufficient. A woman walking past them adjusted her pace, not consciously, not obviously, just a subtle acceleration, the body's instinct to minimize exposure to threat. Anna stopped at a plaza. A broadcast screen mounted on a building showed a figure in a red cape addressing a crowd. The sound was muted, but the message was clear in every gesture. Order, safety, protection. The people in the plaza didn't look up at the screen. They knew what it said. Anos closed his eyes and felt the shape of this world's power structure. It wasn't complex. A single point of overwhelming force at the top. Concentric circles of enforcement radiating downward. And at the bottom, millions of people who had learned that survival meant compliance. He'd seen this before. Different worlds, different tyrants, same fundamental architecture. A prison that looked like civilization. He opened his eyes. The air pressure changed. A displacement of atmosphere. Something moving fast. Superman landed in the plaza 30 feet away. The impact was controlled. Precise. Not a show of force, just a statement of capability. The people in the plaza scattered without running. Orderly evacuation. They'd practiced this. Superman stood straight, hands loose at his sides, expression calm. He wore the symbol on his chest, like armor. Red and blue and gold, the colors that used to mean something else. "You don't belong here," Superman said. His voice carried easily across the distance. Not loud. Simply impossible to ignore. Anos turned to face him fully. "I was invited. By criminals, insurgents, people who want to destroy the peace we've built." Peace. Anos let the word hang in the air between them. "Is that what you call this?" Superman's jaw tightened. "I call it a world where families can walk at night without fear. Where children don't bury their parents because some psychopath decided to make a point. Where order means something. And freedom. Freedom without security is chaos. I've seen what that looks like. I've held the bodies it creates." Anos studied him, saw the conviction, the certainty, the weight of a decision made long ago and reinforced every day since. "You believe that?" Anos said. It wasn't a question. "I know it." "Then you're more dangerous than the chaos you claim to prevent." Superman's eyes flared red. Heat vision warming but not igniting. A warning. "I'm going to give you one chance," Superman said. "Leave. Go back to wherever you came from. This world doesn't need another threat to manage." "I am not a threat." "Then what are you?" Anos met his gaze directly. Those red eyes held something Superman couldn't quite identify. Not defiance, not fear. Something colder. "A consequence, huh?" Anos said. The heat vision flared brighter. Superman moved. Faster than sound. Faster than thought. The kind of speed that broke bones and shattered concrete and ended fights before they began. His fist should have connected with Anos's face. Should have driven him through 3 buildings and into the ground. Anos wasn't there. Not because he dodged. He simply occupied a different position now. 3 feet to the left. As if the space between him and Superman's trajectory had never existed. Superman's momentum carried him past. He arrested his movement with flight, pivoted midair, came back around. Anos stood exactly where he'd been before, hands still at his sides. "You're fast," Anos said. "But speed requires distance, and distance requires time. You're trying to cross a space I've already removed from the equation." Superman's fists clenched. "What are you?" "Someone who understands what it means to impose order through strength." Anos's voice remained level, factual. "Someone who knows where that path ends. It ends with people living, with families intact, with justice that actually protects the innocent. It ends with you standing alone in a world that fears you more than it trusts you. It ends with every compromise justified, every freedom curtailed, every voice silenced in the name of safety." Anos took a single step forward, And it ends with you convincing yourself that the prison you've built is paradise. Superman's eyes blazed. Heat vision lanced across the plaza. Anos raised one hand, the beams bent. Not blocked, not deflected, simply redirected along paths that no longer led to him. The heat scarred the ground in two perfect arcs. The pavement bubbled and cracked. Superman landed hard. The plaza shook. "You want to fight?" he said. "Fine. But people could get hurt." "Then stop fighting. I'm not the one who needs to stop." Anos looked past Superman at the broadcast screen, at the empty plaza, at the city that had learned to be silent. "You already stopped," Anos said. "The moment you decided their safety was more important than their choice. The moment you made yourself the arbiter of acceptable thought." He lowered his hand. "You're not fighting for them anymore. You're fighting to maintain the system that needs them to stay afraid." Superman blurred forward again. This time no holding back. Maximum speed, maximum force. The kind of impact that ended doomsday. Anos caught his fist. Caught it cleanly, like plucking a ball from the air. Superman's momentum stopped. All of it. Instantaneously. The physics of it should have torn his arm from the socket. Should have shattered every bone in his body. He remained intact, frozen, held by a grip that didn't strain or tremble. Anos looked at the fist in his hand, at the man who'd put the weight of a world behind it. "Strength is not the problem," Anos said quietly. "It's the conclusion you drew from it. You have power, therefore you must be right. Therefore you must act. Therefore everyone else must obey." He released Superman's fist. That is the logic of every tyrant who ever lived. Superman pulled back. Heat vision flared at full intensity. Twin beams that could cut through mountains. Anos didn't move. The beams struck his chest and stopped. Not absorbed, not reflected. Simply denied. As if they'd encountered a principle more fundamental than physics. The heat vision cut off. Superman's breathing was faster now. Not exhausted, confused. "What are you?" he asked again. "Someone you cannot intimidate, cannot overpower, cannot make disappear." Superman's hand moved to his belt. A device, familiar lines. Kryptonian technology adapted for Earth use. A phantom zone projector, smaller than the military versions, personal scale. But the same principle. Anos saw it and understood immediately. Not just what it was, what it meant. That Superman carried erasure as a tool. That the ultimate solution to intractable problems was to remove them from existence entirely. "You're making a choice," Anos said. "I'm removing a threat. You're proving my point." Superman activated the projector. White light speared across the plaza. Not a beam, a field. Reality warping energy designed to extract matter from one plane of existence and deposit it in another. The light enveloped Anos completely. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the world twisted. Space folded. The laws governing presence and absence rearranged themselves. Anos felt the pull, felt the mechanism trying to relocate him, felt the phantom zone opening like a wound in the structure of reality. He didn't resist. Resistance would break the projector, break the mechanism, break the lessons Superman needed to learn. He let it take him. The plaza returned to normal, empty, scarred pavement, smoke rising from heat-damaged concrete. Superman stood alone, the projector still humming in his hand. He looked at the space where Anos had been, tried to feel victorious, felt hollow instead. The device went silent. He clipped it back to his belt. The plaza remained empty. The broadcast screen continued its muted declarations. The city stayed quiet. Superman took off into the sky. Behind him, something had changed. Not in the visible world, but in the space between cause and effect. In the realm where consequences lived. The Phantom Zone had accepted a prisoner it wasn't designed to hold. Say, the Phantom Zone was white. Not the white of light or snow or paper. The white of absence. Of color removed. Of reality suspended. Anos stood in the void and felt its architecture immediately. Not a place, a state. Existence without time, presence without location. A prison built from the concept of separation itself. Around him, other presences drifted. Shapes, suggestions of form. Prisoners caught between being and not being. Some had been here for decades, some for longer. The zone didn't distinguish. Anos walked. Direction was meaningless here, but movement remained a choice. A figure materialized ahead. Human, male, middle-aged. His form flickered like a failing transmission. "You're new," the man said. His voice echoed strangely. "You still have definition. That'll fade. Give it time, or what passes for time here." "How long have you been in this place?" Anos asked. The man laughed. The sound hurt. "I don't know. I was a journalist. I wrote about the regime, about the disappearances. They called it sedition. Superman himself signed the order." He looked down at his hands. They were translucent. "I can't remember my daughter's face anymore. Can't remember what my apartment looked like. The zone takes that. Takes everything except the knowledge that you were." Anos continued walking. More figures appeared. A teacher who'd questioned curriculum changes. A doctor who'd refused to falsify medical records. A teenager who'd shared the wrong video. None violent, none dangerous. Just inconvenient. Just asking the wrong questions. The zone held them all in the same eternal suspension. Guilt and innocence rendered equally meaningless by the simple fact of removal. Anos stopped walking, closed his eyes, felt the structure of this place, the rules that governed its existence, the fundamental principle that made it function. A prison of concept, of separation given form, of the space between present and absent. He opened his eyes. "No," he said. The word carried weight, not volume, authority. The kind of statement that didn't ask permission or seek agreement. A declaration of what would be. The white void rippled. Anos reached out with will alone, found the seams in the zone's construction, the places where concept became law, where the idea of separation crystallized into actual barrier. He didn't break them. Breaking would be crude, inefficient. Instead, he rewrote them. The Phantom Zone was designed to suspend, to hold, to maintain prisoners in a state of neither existence nor true absence. Anos changed its purpose. If this place was meant to be a void where nothing could be verified or proven, then he would make it a crucible where truth became unavoidable. The white began to shift. Patterns emerged, shapes that weren't shapes. The prisoners around him became more defined, not less. Their forms solidified. The journalist looked down at his hands. They were solid now. Complete. "What's happening?" he asked. "Justice, Ma," Anos said. The zone trembled. Not physical movement, a fundamental shift in its nature. It had been a place of erasure. Now it was becoming something else, a courtroom, where the only evidence was what prisoners brought with them. Their memories, their truths. Their guilt or innocence laid bare not by judgment, but by the simple fact of being forced to confront what they were. Those who'd been sent here unjustly found their coherence returning, their sense of self, their ability to remember and speak and testify. Those who'd been sent here for actual crimes felt something different. The weight of what they'd done, not imposed from outside, not punishment or torture, just the unavoidable reality of their own actions reflected back at them with perfect clarity. The zone had been a tool of oppression. Anos had made it a mirror. Outside in the world where time still moved and space still mattered, alarms began to sound in regime facilities. Monitoring stations registered impossible readings from the phantom zone. Stability metrics wavered. Containment protocols reported anomalies. The tool Superman had relied on was no longer obedient. It had begun to speak. And the first thing it said was the truth. Batman stood in the insurgency's command center and studied the data streams with growing unease. The Phantom Zone monitoring network had gone haywire 6 hours ago. Stability readings fluctuating wildly. Containment integrity reports showing impossible values. The projectors themselves registering feedback loops that shouldn't exist. And underneath all the technical noise, something else. Reports from regime facilities. Prisoners who'd been zoned were becoming visible again. Not physically present, but traceable, identifiable. Their data signatures emerging from the void like ghosts learning to speak. "It's him," one of the techs said. Young woman, Oracle's protege. Her fingers danced across holographic displays. Has to be. The anomaly started right after Superman used the projector on that target in the plaza. "Can we extract him?" Batman asked. "Theoretically. But the zone's behavior is unpredictable now. Opening a retrieval portal might destabilize whatever he's doing in there, or it might give us exactly what we need." Batman weighed the options. Anos was powerful. That much was clear from the brief confrontation with Superman. But power without direction was just another variable, another threat to manage. If they could retrieve him at the right moment, position him correctly, they might be able to leverage his presence into a public confrontation Superman couldn't simply erase. Force the regime to engage in the open. Break the illusion of invincibility. It was a plan built on unknowns and assumptions. Batman hated it. He authorized it anyway. "Start calculating extraction vectors, Mod," he said. "I want options ready in 30 minutes. The tech nodded and bent back to her work. Batman pulled out a secure communicator, encrypted beyond anything the regime could crack. Hopefully. "Constantine," he said when the line connected. "We need to talk about containment." Static. Then Constantine's voice rough with exhaustion. "You want to bind him?" "I want to make sure we can work with him, guide him, make sure his actions align with our objectives. He's not a weapon mate. You saw him, heard him. That's not something you guide. That's something you point at a problem and hope you're standing behind it when it goes off. Then we need safeguards, contingencies, something that ensures he stays focused on the regime and not on us." Constantine laughed. No humor in it. Batman, he looked at Superman and called him a tyrant. "You think he's going to give us a pass? We summoned him. We brought him here. We're complicit in everything that happens next. That's why we need control." Control. Constantine exhaled slowly. Right. I'll see what I can do. But don't blame me when the bindings snap and he decides to have a chat about our methods. The line went dead. Batman stared at the displays, at the fluctuating readings from the Phantom Zone, at the shape of a plan that felt increasingly like desperation. Across the city, in a regime command facility, Wonder Woman stood before a tactical hologram and came to a similar conclusion. "We need him out of the zone," she said. "Contained, interrogated. If he's working with the insurgency, we need to know their plan. If he's independent, we need to determine his threat level and respond accordingly." The officer beside her hesitated. Superman's orders were clear. The target was zoned for removal. Retrieval wasn't part of the protocol. The protocol didn't account for the target changing the zone itself. Diana gestured at the hologram, red warning indicators blooming across the phantom space. "Whatever he's doing in there is destabilizing our primary containment system. We can't afford to leave him unchecked." Superman is dealing with a dozen other crisis points right now. I'm authorized to make tactical decisions in the field. This is one of them. The officer nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I'll have the science division prepare extraction equipment." Diana studied the hologram. Something about this felt wrong. Not the decision, the situation. They'd zoned threats before. Contained them. Removed them from the board, standard procedure. But this one had looked at Superman and called him a tyrant. Had taken the hit deliberately. Had let himself be removed. Why? What kind of threat volunteers for containment? The answer settled in her gut like cold iron. The kind that wanted to be inside the system. The kind that planned to break it from within. She activated her comm. All units, priority alert. When the target emerges from the Phantom Zone, containment teams engage immediately. Lethal force authorized if necessary. Do not attempt negotiation or delay. Acknowledgements chimed back. Professional, efficient. The regime's machine responding to input. Diana hoped it would be enough. In the Tower of Fate, Constantine drew symbols on the floor with chalk that burned purple at the edges. Binding circles. Containment matrices. The kind of working that made his hands shake and his head pound. Fate stood nearby, watching in silence. "You know this won't hold him," Fate said finally. "Don't need it to hold. Just need it to slow him down. Give us a chance to explain, to negotiate." Constantine finished the last rune. "Assuming he's in a talking mood." "He will not be. Thanks for the vote of confidence. You mistake my meaning." Fate's voice carried that same odd resonance, multiple tones overlapping. He will not negotiate because he has already decided. The moment he saw this world, he understood its nature. What you're attempting to do now is prevent a verdict that has already been rendered. Constantine sat back on his heels. What verdict? That neither side deserves to win. That the regime has become what it claimed to fight. That the insurgency has compromised itself in the name of resistance. That this world has chosen fear over freedom and called it progress. Heavy stuff. Constantine pulled out his flask. Empty, he put it away. So what's he going to do? What he always does. What beings of his nature must do. Fate turned toward the window. He will dismantle the structures that enable tyranny. He will force both sides to confront what they have become. And then he will leave. Just like that. Just like that. He's not a savior. He is not a conqueror. He is a correction, a reset. The universe's way of saying a system has failed beyond redemption. Constantine looked at the binding circle, at the symbols that suddenly felt like drawing a cage for a hurricane. "Fuck," he said quietly. In the phantom zone, Anos felt the attempts to retrieve him like ripples in still water. Multiple vectors, different methodologies, the insurgency trying to calculate extraction, the regime preparing forcible removal, Constantine weaving bindings meant to constrain, all of them operating under the assumption that he was a variable to be managed, a piece to be moved on their board. Anos stood in the transformed zone and considered his options. He could remain here, continue reshaping this space, turn it into something that served its original purpose, containing genuine threats, while refusing to be a tool of political convenience. He could let them extract him, return to their world, engage with their conflict on their terms. Or he could demonstrate that their terms were never relevant. He chose the third option. The phantom zone had been built as a separation between existence and absence, a gap in reality designed to hold what couldn't be contained by normal means. It operated on the principle that location and presence were mutable properties, that you could be removed from the equation of the universe without ceasing to be. Anos understood that principle, had worked with similar concepts before. The idea that existence could be conditional, negotiable, subject to revision. He applied pressure to the conditionality. The zone didn't break, didn't shatter or collapse. It simply stopped being relevant. Not to the prisoners still held within. They remained. The transformation he'd enacted persisted. The courtroom of inevitable honesty continued its function. But to Anos himself, the zone's ability to separate him from the physical world became a suggestion rather than a law, a preference rather than a requirement. He stepped through the suggestion and back into reality. No portal, no extraction, no retrieval protocol, just a decision to be elsewhere followed by the act of being there. He materialized in the same plaza where Superman had zoned him. Different time, early morning, the city still waking. Few witnesses. Batman's extraction team arrived 90 seconds later. 6 operatives in tactical gear, weapons drawn. They'd been tracking the zone fluctuations, had triangulated probable emergence coordinates. They found Anos standing in the center of the plaza, hands at his sides, expression neutral. The team leader raised one hand, signal for ready positions. His other hand activated a comm device. Target acquired. Plaza 7, requesting authorization for engagement protocols. Batman's voice came back immediately. Do not engage. Establish perimeter and await secondary support. Constantine's bindings need to be in place before... Anos looked at the team leader. The comm device in his hand sparked, shorted. The connection severed. You want to control me, Anos said. Not angry, not disappointed, simply stating observed fact. You brought me here to be a weapon against your enemy. Now you're afraid I'll be a weapon against you as well. The team leader's jaw tightened. We just want to talk. Coordinate. Make sure we're working toward the same objective. We are not. Then what do you want? Nothing from you. Anos gestured at the city around them. This world has made its choices. Superman chose to impose order through domination. You chose to fight that domination using methods that mirror his own. Both sides convinced of righteousness. Both sides willing to sacrifice others for the greater good. That's not fair. We're trying to restore freedom by planning operations that put civilians at risk, by developing contingencies that treat people as acceptable losses, by telling yourselves that the ends justify the means. Anos took a step forward. You hate him for becoming a tyrant, but you're learning to think like one. The words hit like physical blows. The team leader opened his mouth, closed it, had no response that didn't prove the point. Regime forces arrived from the opposite side. Heavier numbers, Diana at their head. She'd been closer, had moved faster. She landed between Anos and the insurgency team. The lasso of truth coiled at her hip. "Stand down," she said to Batman's people. Then to Anos, "You're coming with us. We have questions. You'll answer them." "Will I?" "Yes." Diana's hand moved toward the lasso. "One way or another." Anos looked at her, saw the conviction, the certainty, the same quality Superman carried, the belief that power meant authority, meant righteousness. "Your lasso compels honesty," he said, "but it requires contact, physical binding. You would need to catch me first." Diana moved. Combat speed honed by centuries of warfare. The lasso whipped out faster than human eye could track. It passed through the space where Anos stood. Caught nothing. He hadn't dodged, hadn't moved at all by any conventional measure. The lasso simply found no purchase, as if the concept of being bound no longer applied to him. Diana pulled the lasso back, adjusted her stance, prepared for a real fight. "Stop," Anos said. The word carried no volume, no emphasis, just a statement of what would be. Diana felt her muscles lock. Not paralysis, not force, just the sudden awareness that continuing this action would be futile. That resistance was a choice she could make, but the outcome was already determined. The insurgency team had similar realizations, weapons still drawn, bodies still ready. But the certainty that using them would accomplish anything had evaporated. Anos looked at both groups, at the ideologies they represented, at the methods they'd embraced. "Your projector," he said to Diana, "the one used to zone me. It no longer functions as intended." "What did you do?" "I corrected its purpose. It was designed to erase people from existence without trial or appeal, to make inconvenient problems disappear. That is not justice. That is not protection. That is erasure disguised as order." He gestured slightly. The holographic displays on every regime device in the plaza flickered. Data streams appeared. Lists, names, dates, charges. Every person who'd been zoned in the last year, their crimes, their trials, or more often, the absence of trials, the direct orders from Superman or his inner circle, political dissidents, journalists, teachers, children whose only crime was recording footage the regime wanted suppressed. The data was irrefutable, pulled directly from the Phantom Zone's records, from the prisoners themselves, their testimonies, their memories, the truth they'd been carrying in that white void. Diana stared at the displays, felt something crack in her chest. "We were protecting people," she said, heard how hollow it sounded. "You were silencing them." Anos turned toward the insurgency team. "And you? Batman's plan to extract me, to use me as leverage. What contingencies did he prepare?" The team leader stayed silent. Anos didn't press. He simply let the silence grow until it became its own answer. "He prepared for casualties," Anos said. "Acceptable losses. Civilian areas he'd be willing to see damaged if it meant putting me where he needed me. Plans that required people to be in danger so Superman would have to choose between stopping me or saving them." The team leader's expression confirmed it. "That is not resistance," Anos said. "That is learning from your enemy, adopting his logic, telling yourself the compromises are necessary, that once he's gone, things will be different. But they won't be, because you'll have become him. He looked at both groups, at the weapons still drawn, at the certainty crumbling in real time. This world has chosen to solve conflict with control. Superman controls through fear. Batman controls through manipulation. Different methods. Same fundamental conclusion, that people cannot be trusted to choose correctly, that someone must decide for them. Diana found her voice. What would you have us do? Let chaos reign, let people suffer. I would have you let them choose. Anos's tone remained level, factual. Give them information, give them agency, give them the ability to decide what kind of world they want to live in. And accept that they might choose incorrectly. That freedom includes the freedom to fail. That's idealistic nonsense, Diana said. People don't always make good choices. Sometimes they need guidance, protection. Then offer it. Don't impose it. Don't make it mandatory. Don't erase those who refuse. Anos paused. The moment you decide that your judgment supersedes their choice, you become what you claim to fight. The plaza was silent, except for the ambient hum of the city waking around them. Anos turned to leave. Where are you going? Diana called. To finish what I started. Your projector no longer erases people without consequence. But the system that enabled it still stands. The infrastructure, the authority, the acceptance. He glanced back. That needs correction as well. He walked away. Neither side moved to stop him. They were too busy confronting what he'd shown them. The reflection in the mirror he'd held up. Batman's calm crackled to life. Constantine's voice. The bindings failed. Didn't slow him down at all. Whatever he is, he's not something we control. Batman watched Anos disappear into the city. I know. So what do we do? Batman thought about the data streams still playing on nearby displays, about the names scrolling past, about the choices that had led here. We stop pretending we're better than Superman, he said quietly, and we start proving it. The connection ended. In the plaza, both teams withdrew, separately, silently. Behind them, the displays continued showing testimony from the Phantom Zone. Names, faces, stories. The city was beginning to see what had been done in the name of peace. And somewhere Superman received reports of the data breach, of the compromised projectors, of the uncontained target now loose and active. He stood on the balcony of his tower and looked out over the city he'd fought so hard to protect. For the first time in years, he felt something he'd almost forgotten. Doubt. Constantine stood in the ruins of a safe house and knew he'd run out of options. The bottle in his hand was empty. Had been for an hour. He kept holding it anyway. Something to grip while the world came apart. The broadcast screens showed riots in 3 cities. Not violent riots. Worse. People demanding answers, demanding accountability. The data from the Phantom Zone had spread like wildfire. Names, faces, stories of people who'd vanished for asking questions, for speaking up, for existing inconveniently. The regime was fracturing, not collapsing, not yet, but cracking visibly. Superman's inner circle divided on how to respond. Some wanted to double down, others wanted to ease restrictions. None of them wanted to admit they'd been wrong. The insurgency wasn't faring better. Batman's carefully constructed plans had been exposed for what they were. Manipulations, calculated risks with human costs. The people they'd claimed to fight for were starting to ask uncomfortable questions about methods and means. Both sides weakening, both sides vulnerable. And Constantine had brought the thing that broke them. He looked at the empty bottle, at the summoning circle still faintly visible on the floor, at the choice he'd made when he thought desperate measures were justified. Anos had done exactly what fate predicted. Dismantled the structures, forced confrontations, left everyone standing in the wreckage of their certainties. But he hadn't fixed anything, hadn't offered solutions, hadn't stayed to help rebuild. Because that wasn't his purpose. He was the storm, not the reconstruction crew. Constantine set down the bottle, picked up his chalk, started drawing new symbols. If destruction was already here, might as well see it through. Might as well call up something even worse and let the whole rotten system burn. Might as well make sure nobody won. He drew the circle larger this time, more complex, pulling from the same conceptual space he'd used before. The realm where demon kings and cosmic tyrants resided. The place Fate's wards had deflected away from. This time he wouldn't let the wards interfere. This time he'd punch straight through to the source. He spoke the words, felt them scrape his throat raw. Old language, older than Latin, older than human speech. The kind of sounds that reality itself recognized as demands rather than requests. The air split, not cleanly, not surgically like when Anos arrived. This was a wound, a tear that bled wrongness into the physical world. Red light spilled through, not fire, not energy, something that hurt to look at because it existed in more dimensions than human perception could parse. Constantine felt the wards in the Tower of Fate straining, felt Fate himself trying to contain the breach. But the damage from the first summoning had weakened the barriers. The cosmic infrastructure was tired, stretched thin. The rift widened, and something noticed. Batman received the alert while coordinating insurgency response to the civilian uprisings. 3 words on his encrypted comm that made his blood freeze. Constantine opened hell. He was moving before the message finished, calling in everyone who could respond, everyone who wasn't already dealing with crisis points across the globe. The coordinates led to an industrial sector, abandoned factories, no civilians nearby. Constantine had at least picked his apocalypse carefully. Batman arrived to find the sky wrong, red, shot through with black veins that pulsed like infected capillaries. The clouds moved in patterns that suggested intelligence, malevolence. The air tasted of copper and ash. The rift hung above the factory district like a vertical ocean. Things moved on the other side, shapes that made his tactical mind short-circuit trying to categorize them. Constantine stood at ground zero, swaying, blood running from his nose and ears. The summoning circle around him was scorched black. "What did you do?" Batman demanded. Constantine laughed, wet, pained. "I finished what I started, called up the real thing, no deflection, no accidents, straight to the source. Trigon. Or something like him, something that makes Anos look like a gentle suggestion." Constantine spat blood. "You wanted leverage. Here it is. Let's see Superman handle this." The rift pulsed, expanded. The red light intensified until it cast shadows that moved independently of their sources. A hand emerged from the tear. Not metaphorically, an actual hand the size of a building. Red skin, claws that could rend steel like paper. It gripped the edge of reality and pulled. The demon that followed was impossible to fully comprehend. Too large, too present, existing in multiple states simultaneously. Batman's brain tried to process height and mass and settled on too much. 4 eyes burning with light that had never touched anything living. A voice that wasn't sound, but pressure. Presence weaponized. "Worlds burn," the demon said. Not words. Concepts transmitted directly into consciousness. Realms fall. This one joins them. Superman arrived 30 seconds later. Sonic boom cracking across the district. He took in the situation instantly. The rift, the demon, Constantine bleeding on the ground. "Get out of here," Superman said to Batman. Not angry, not even particularly loud. Just stating logistics. Not a chance. "This isn't..." The demon moved. Faster than something that size should be capable of. Its hand swept across the factory district. Buildings collapsed not from force, but from reality's basic structural laws, ceasing to function where it touched. Superman flew up to meet it, hit the hand with maximum force. The kind of punch that shattered asteroids. The demon's hand didn't slow. Caught Superman mid-flight, squeezed. Kryptonian biology screamed. Bones that could withstand nuclear detonations creaked. Superman's heat vision blazed at full power, cut into red flesh. The demon didn't seem to notice. "Weak," the demon said. "This realm's champion is weak." It threw Superman into the ground. The impact cratered 3 city blocks. Batman was already moving, calling reinforcements, calculating vectors. The demon was too powerful for conventional tactics. They needed magic, divine intervention, something that operated on the same level. His comm crackled. "This is Dr. Fate. I'm inbound. Constantine's breach has destabilized the barriers I established. The rift will continue expanding unless we can establish new anchors. What do you need? Time. And someone to keep that thing occupied while I work?" Superman pulled himself from the crater, blood on his face. First time Batman had seen him bleed in years. He took off again. This time not alone. Wonder Woman arrived from the west, Shazam from the south. The remaining members of the regime's inner circle who weren't dealing with other crisis points. They hit the demon in coordinated strikes. Lightning, divine weapons, fists backed by godly strength. The demon swatted them aside. Not easily, not without effort, but inevitably, like an adult dealing with persistent children. "Amusing," it said, "but insufficient." The rift pulsed again, more shapes emerging, smaller demons, still building-sized, still capable of tearing reality apart with casual gestures. Batman activated the insurgency's emergency protocols. Every operative not currently essential elsewhere converged on the industrial district. Not to fight. They couldn't fight this. But they could evacuate. Clear the surrounding areas. Save the people who'd be caught in the crossfire. Dr. Fate materialized in a column of golden light. He raised both hands and began weaving patterns in the air. Complex geometries, divine mathematics, the kind of working that required absolute concentration and zero interruption. The smaller demons noticed him. Changed trajectory. Fate was the real threat, the one trying to close their door. Superman intercepted the first wave, took hits that would have leveled mountains, kept flying, kept fighting, not trying to win, just trying to buy seconds. Wonder Woman's lasso caught one demon around the neck. It howled. The lasso of truth forced honesty even from things that existed purely to deceive. The demon thrashed, burned from the inside, dissolved into smoke that tasted of sulfur and despair. One down. 7 more emerging. Shazam channeled lightning directly into the rift, trying to cauterize it, force it closed through raw magical power. The rift absorbed the lightning and grew brighter, hungrier. "It feeds on resistance," the large demon said. Its voice shook the ground. "Your struggle sustains us." Batman pulled Constantine back from ground zero. The man was barely conscious, blood pooling under him. "You're dying," Batman said. "Yeah. Worth it, though." Constantine coughed. "Red spray. Least I got to see Superman bleed. You're going to see him die if we can't close that rift." "Can't close it. Already tried. It's anchored to..." Constantine's eyes went wide. Oh, fuck. What? The first summoning, Anos, left a scar, a weak point. This rift isn't random. It opened where the barriers were already damaged, where he came through. Batman's mind raced. So we need him. Need him to what he's not here. Don't know where he is, and even if we found him, why would he help? We tried to control him, tried to use him. He's probably halfway to another dimension by now. Batman looked up at the battle, at Superman taking hit after hit, at Fate weaving his working with hands that were beginning to shake, at the rift growing larger with each passing second. "He'll help," Batman said quietly, "because this is what he does. He corrects systems that have failed." "This isn't a system. This is hell eating reality. It's the consequence of our choices, of summoning power we couldn't control, of trying to fight tyranny by becoming what we fought." Batman stood. He'll see it. He'll understand. And he'll do what needs to be done. Constantine laughed weakly. "You have way more faith in him than I do." "I don't have faith. I have observation. He could have left already. Could have walked away the moment he escaped the Phantom Zone. But he's still here, still watching, still waiting for us to learn." "Learn what?" "That we need to ask for help instead of demanding it." Batman activated his comm, broadcast on all frequencies, not encrypted, not hidden, public. "This is Batman. I'm requesting assistance from Anos Voldigoad. Not as a weapon, not as a tool, as someone who might be able to prevent a catastrophe we caused. If you can hear this, if you're still in this world, we need you." Silence. Just the sounds of battle. Superman screaming as another hit connected. Fate chanting in languages that predated human civilization. Then the air beside Batman rippled. Anos stepped into view. Unchanged, unruffled, like he'd been standing there the entire time and only now chose to be visible. "You're learning," he said. Batman let out a breath he hadn't known he was holding. "Can you close it?" Anos looked at the rift, at the demon, at the battle raging across the district. "No," he said. Constantine groaned. "Fantastic. We're all dead. I cannot close it because closing requires opposing it directly. And this entity feeds on opposition, grows stronger from resistance." Anos tilted his head slightly. "But I can remove the conditions that allow it to exist here." "How?" "The rift opened because the barriers between worlds were weakened. Specifically the barriers I passed through when Constantine summoned me. Your magic left a wound. This demon simply widened it." "So we need to heal the wound," Batman said. "Not heal. Sever. Cut the connection between this realm and the one that demon originates from. But doing so requires multiple anchors, multiple points of power holding reality stable while the severance occurs. Batman understood immediately. You need the people fighting up there. Yes, they provide opposition. Keep the demon occupied. Give me space to work. But someone must coordinate them, must ensure they strike when needed, hold when necessary. Function as a unified force rather than individual combatants. Batman looked at the battle, at people who'd been on opposite sides of a civil war, now fighting together, because the alternative was annihilation. I can do that, he said. Good. Anos turned to Constantine. You opened this. Your blood is part of the anchor. I need you conscious. Bit of a tall order, mate? Anos placed one hand on Constantine's shoulder. The bleeding stopped. The internal damage didn't heal, just stabilized, enough to keep him alive, enough to keep him functional. You'll live, Anos said. Uncomfortably, but you'll live to face what you've done. Constantine laughed. It turned into a cough. You're a real comfort. Anos walked toward the rift. Batman activated his comm. All units, regime and insurgency both. This is a coordinated operation. Fate is establishing anchors. Anos is preparing to sever the rift's connection. We need to keep that demon occupied. Keep it focused on us. Don't let it interfere with the working. Superman's voice came back, strained, pained. Who put you in command? I did, Anos said. His voice carried across the battlefield without amplification. Because he understands what needs to happen. And because neither of you have the capacity to coordinate while fighting. A pause, then Superman. Understood. What do you need? Batman felt something shift. Not in the physical world, in the dynamic. For the first time in years, both sides were taking orders from the same voice, working toward the same goal. Not because they agreed, but because the alternative was extinction. Fate, Batman said. Status on anchors. 3 established. Need 7 more, geometrically distributed around the rift's perimeter. Superman, Wonder Woman, Shazam establish anchor points at these coordinates. Batman transmitted the positions. Mathematical precision. Hold them for 60 seconds each. Fate will lock them in. They moved. Professional, efficient. The muscle memory of heroes who'd worked together before the schism, the demon noticed the shift in tactics, noticed Fate's working intensifying, understood what they were attempting. No, it roared. This realm is ours. It lunged for Fate, massive hand reaching to crush the golden figure. Anos stepped into its path. The demon's hand hit him and stopped, completely. Instantaneously, like striking a wall that existed in every dimension simultaneously. Your realm is not here, Anos said. His voice remained level, calm. You were invited by someone who lacked authority to offer invitation. That invitation is hereby revoked. You cannot revoke what is claimed. I can, I am, I will. Anos raised one hand. You exist here because a door was opened, because barriers were crossed, because a wound in reality gave you purchase. I am the one who created that wound. Therefore, I have authority to close it. The demon's 4 eyes narrowed. You are the anomaly, the one who should not be. Yes, which means I operate under different rules than your kind. You feed on resistance, on opposition, on the energy of those who fight you. Anos's hand began to glow. Not red, not gold, something darker, purple edged with black. I do not fight you. I simply deny the framework that allows you to be here. The demon roared, swung its other hand. Anos caught it, held it. The physics of the interaction made no sense. Size and mass rendered meaningless. Just will against will. Intent against intent. Fate's voice rose in pitch. The anchors blazed brighter, Superman and the others holding their positions despite the smaller demons swarming them. Despite the pain, despite exhaustion, Batman coordinated, called rotations, directed support, made sure no anchor point fell before fate could lock it. 7 anchors, 8, 9. Anos began to walk forward, pushing against the demon. Not with strength, with something more fundamental, the assertion that this thing did not belong, that its presence was a violation, that reality itself rejected it. The demon's form began to destabilize, flickering, losing coherence. Impossible, it said. We are eternal. We cannot be. You can be, Anos said. You will be. You are being, right now. The 10th anchor locked into place. Fate's working completed. A geometric cage of divine light surrounding the rift, containing it, preparing to sever it from its source. Anos released the demon's hands, stepped back. Fate, he said. Now. Fate brought his hands together. The working activated. All 10 anchors synchronized. Power flowed through channels older than Earth's sun. Divine mathematics executing a single-function separation. The rift screamed. Not sound. Dimensional stress. The pain of being cut from its origin. The demon tried to retreat. Found itself trapped between Anos and Fate's cage. Between the physical rejection and the magical severing. This is not the end, it said. We will return. This realm will fall. Perhaps, Anos said, but not today, not through this door, not while I am here to close it. The rift collapsed. Not slowly, instantly, like a wound snapping shut. The demon and its smaller kin were drawn back through, pulled into their own realm. The tears sealed behind them. The red light faded. The black veins in the sky dissolved. The wrongness in the air dissipated. Silence fell over the industrial district. Broken buildings, scorched earth, but the world still intact, still present, still possible. Superman landed heavily, dropped to one knee, blood and burns covering him. He'd taken the worst of it, drawn the most attention, bought the most time. Wonder Woman landed beside him, helped him stand. They both looked at Anos. Fate lowered his hands. The golden light dimmed. He swayed. The working had cost him, badly. Batman approached the group. Constantine limped behind him, still alive, still bleeding, still processing what he'd done. Anos stood at the center of the scorched circle, looking at the space where the rift had been. It's over, Superman asked. For now, Anos said. The door is closed, the barriers reinforced. But the wound I created when I arrived remains. It will heal eventually, but slowly. And while it heals, this world is more vulnerable than it was before. So we're weaker because you came here. Diana's voice held accusation. You were always weak. You simply didn't know it. Now you do. Anos turned to face them. A system that relies on absolute control cannot survive genuine threat. cannot adapt to chaos it didn't create. You spent so long fighting each other that you forgot how to fight together. We fought together today, Superman said, because you had no choice. Because extinction forced cooperation. Anos looked at each of them in turn. That is not strength. That is desperation. Real strength is choosing to work together before the world is ending. Choosing to trust before trust is your only option. Constantine collapsed. Batman caught him, called for medical support. Anos watched this. Watched Batman helping the man who'd caused the crisis. Watched Superman and Wonder Woman not attacking, not blaming. Just standing in the wreckage and acknowledging what had happened. You're learning, Anos said again, slowly, painfully. But you're learning. He turned to leave. Wait, Superman said. You said you can't stay. That while the wound heals, we're vulnerable. What if something else comes through? What if... Then you deal with it. Together. Without me, without someone to impose order or judge or save you. Anos paused. That's what freedom means, Superman. Making your own choices. Facing your own consequences. Standing or falling by your own actions. He walked away. This time no one tried to stop him. They stood in the ruins of the industrial district and felt the weight of what they'd done. What they'd become. What they might still choose to be. The city was still cracking. Still processing the data from the Phantom Zone. Still demanding answers. But now both sides would have to provide those answers together. Have to rebuild together. Have to face what they'd created together. No more blaming. No more absolutes. No more easy certainties. Just the hard work of trying to be better than what they'd been. The sun rose over the broken district. Red light giving way to gold. A new day. Not fixed. Not healed. But possible. And possibility Anos had shown them was enough to begin. 3 days after the rift closed, Superman stood in the ruins of his tower and tried to remember why he'd built it. The answer should have been simple. Protection, oversight. A vantage point to see threats before they materialized. To coordinate response. To maintain order. But now looking at the broadcast screens showing protests in a dozen cities, he couldn't recall when oversight became surveillance. When protection became control. When order became the thing people feared more than chaos. The data from the Phantom Zone played on loop across every network. His inner circle had tried to suppress it, failed. The information was out. Names, faces, crimes that weren't crimes, political speech, journalism, questions asked at the wrong time to the wrong people. Diana stood nearby, silent. She'd been silent since the battle, since watching Superman bleed, since realizing the price they'd paid for stability. We need to address this, she said finally. I know. Not just address. Acknowledge. Accept responsibility. Superman turned to look at her. And then what? Step down, dismantle the regime, return to the chaos that killed. He stopped. Couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't say the name. You can't lead through fear forever, Diana said quietly. Eventually, people stop fearing the consequences and start fearing you. We've crossed that line. We crossed it a long time ago. So we give up everything we built. We give up what we became while building it. The words hung in the air. Heavy, unavoidable. A chime from the security system. Someone at the tower's entrance. Superman checked the display, frowned. Anos Voldigoad stood at the main gate, waiting, not attempting entry. just standing there with the same calm expression he'd worn since arrival. "He's here," Superman said. Diana moved to the window, saw Anos below. Why? Only one way to find out. They descended together. Neither spoke. The elevator ride felt longer than it should have. Anos stood in the entry hall when they arrived. He'd been allowed in by security systems that should have required authorization. More proof, if any, were needed that conventional barriers meant nothing to him. "You came back," Superman said. "I never left," Anos replied. "I've been watching, waiting to see what you would choose. Choose whether to learn or to repeat, whether to acknowledge what you've become or to justify it further." Diana's hand moved toward her lasso. Stopped. The reflex remained, but the certainty behind it had fractured. "You wanted to see us fail," she said. "No, I wanted to see you face the consequences of your choices. Failure and success are measurements you apply. I simply reveal what is." Superman felt anger rising, pushed it down. Anger had been his first response to everything for so long. Maybe that was part of the problem. "What do you want from us?" he asked. "Nothing. I want nothing from you. But I will take something." "What?" Anos gestured slightly. The air rippled. Every Phantom Zone projector in the facility materialized in the hall. Floating, suspended. Technology that had been locked in secure vaults, now arranged in neat rows like evidence at trial. "These," Anos said, "and every other projector in your arsenal. Every tool you've used to erase people from existence without trial or appeal. Every device that let you play judge and executioner while calling it justice." Superman's jaw tightened. "Those are necessary. For criminals we can't contain. For threats for people who disagreed with you." Anos's voice remained level. "For journalists who published information you wanted suppressed. For children who recorded footage of your methods. For anyone who made you question whether your perfect order was worth the price." "That's not..." Superman stopped. Couldn't finish the denial. The data was public now. Everyone knew what the projectors had been used for. "You want to take our ability to protect people," Diana said. "I want to take your ability to make them disappear." Anos walked forward, stopped in front of Superman, met his eyes directly. "You have strength, speed, power that dwarfs almost everything in this universe. But you also have doubt now, uncertainty. The knowledge that your methods created the crisis that nearly destroyed this world." That was Constantine's. That was your system creating desperate people. Batman summoned me because he saw no other option. Constantine opened hell because watching you win slowly was worse than risking annihilation. They made terrible choices. But you created the conditions that made those choices seem reasonable. The words landed like physical blows, not because they were cruel, because they were accurate. "So you're here to judge us?" Superman said. "No. You've already been judged. By the people you claimed to protect. By the allies you've lost. By the mirror you were forced to see in." Anos gestured at the projectors. "I'm here to ensure you can't avoid that judgment by returning to old methods." He raised one hand. The projectors began to disintegrate. Not explosively, not dramatically. They simply ceased to be. Unmade at a fundamental level. Converted from matter and energy back into conceptual possibility, and then dismissed from possibility entirely. Superman moved. Couldn't help it. tried to stop what was happening. Anos didn't block him, didn't counter, simply looked at him. And Superman felt his momentum die, felt the futility of opposing this, felt the weight of every choice that had led here. He stopped, watched the projectors disappear, felt something between rage and relief. "You're taking away our options," Diana said. "I'm taking away one option. The option to erase problems instead of solving them. You'll have to do the harder work now. Convince people, negotiate, compromise. Actually face the people you've harmed and attempt repair. And if we can't, if chaos returns, if people die because we couldn't act fast enough, then people die. And you accept that as the cost of freedom, of choice, of refusing to be tyrants." Anos lowered his hand. The last projector vanished. "You've spent years preventing death by preventing life, by making this world so controlled, so restricted that nothing could threaten it. But nothing could truly live in it either." Superman stared at the empty space where the projectors had been, felt the absence like a phantom limb. "What makes you think we won't just build more?" he asked. "Nothing. You could. You have the knowledge, the resources, the justification." Anos turned toward the exit. "But you'll have to convince yourselves it's necessary first. Have to explain to the people whose data you released why erasing problems is still the answer. Have to look at what you've become and decide that's what you want to remain." He walked to the door, paused at the threshold. "I'll be gone soon. The barriers are healing. My presence strains them. But before I leave, you should know this world was never my responsibility. I didn't come here to save you. I came here to show you what you'd built, what you'd accepted, what you'd become." "And now," Diana asked, "now you decide whether the system you created is worth preserving, whether the order you imposed deserves to stand, whether the fear you cultivated will give way to something else." Anos looked back at them. "I don't have answers for you, only consequences. What you do with them is your choice." He stepped through the door and disappeared. Superman and Diana stood in the empty hall, surrounded by the absence of tools they'd relied on, faced with decisions they could no longer defer. "He's right," Diana said quietly. "I know. We have to do better. I know that too." They stood in silence. Two people who'd tried to save the world and nearly destroyed it, who'd believed in absolute solutions and learned the cost of certainty. Outside the city continued its reckoning. Protests, demands, grief and anger given voice. And for the first time in years, Superman didn't know how to respond. Didn't have a plan that started with control and ended with compliance. He just had the knowledge that something had to change, that he had to change. Whether he could remain to be seen. Batman found Anos on the same rooftop where this had all begun. The place he'd stood watching people disappear into the zone. The place where desperation had become action. Anos stood at the edge, looking at the city, not judging now, just observing. "You're leaving," Batman said. Not a question. "Yes, I've done what I came to do," which was show you the cost of your methods, force both sides to confront what they'd become, remove the tools that made tyranny easy. Anos glanced at Batman. "And ensure you understand that fixing this is your responsibility, not mine." Batman moved to stand beside him, looked out at the city, at the protests, at the slow, painful work of accountability beginning. "We'll fail," Batman said. "Probably. We've been fighting each other so long we've forgotten how to build together, how to trust, how to lead without controlling." "Probably," Anos agreed. "So why bother? Why break the system if you know we'll just build another broken one?" "Because the act of building matters. Because choosing to try matters. Because the moment you stop pretending you have all the answers and start asking others for help is the moment you begin to deserve the power you wield." Anos turned from the edge, faced Batman fully. "You wanted control. Constantine wanted victory. Superman wanted safety. All understandable desires. All insufficient reasons to deny people their agency." He paused. "I've been what you're becoming. I've imposed peace through overwhelming force. I know how it ends. The silence, the obedience, the slow death of everything that makes freedom worth having." "So you stopped," Batman said. "Realized it was wrong." "I realized it was incomplete. That order without consent is just another form of violence. That protecting people by removing their choices is the same as harming them." Anos looked at the city. "I didn't learn that from philosophy. I learned it from seeing what I'd created. A world that was safe, peaceful, and slowly dying from lack of challenge, lack of risk, lack of the friction that makes growth possible. And you think we can do better? I think you have no choice but to try. The alternative is continuing as you were, and that leads to extinction, either through rebellion that tears itself apart, or stagnation that withers into nothing." Batman absorbed this, thought about Dick, about the moment this all went wrong, about the choices made in grief and rage. "Thank you," he said. Anos nodded once. "Don't thank me. Prove you learned something." He walked past Batman, toward the stairwell, stopped at the door. "One more thing," Anos said. "Constantine will try again. We'll look for another shortcut, another desperate solution. Stop him. Not by force, not by control, by showing him that slow, difficult progress is better than fast destruction." "I will." Anos descended the stairs. By the time Batman reached the street level, he was gone. Not dramatically, not with ceremony, just absent, as if he had never been there at all. Except the city was different. The people were different. The systems were different. And Batman had work to do. He activated his comm, called the insurgency, called the contacts in the regime who'd begun questioning, called everyone who might be willing to try something new. "This is Batman. I'm calling a meeting. Neutral ground. Representatives from all sides. We need to talk about what comes next." Responses came back. Cautious, uncertain, but willing. It was a start, not salvation, not victory, just the beginning of something that might eventually become better than what they'd been. The sun rose over the city. Another day, another chance. Above the sky was clear, the barriers healing, the wound closing, and somewhere beyond sight and dimension, Anos Voldigoad returned to his own realm. His work here was done. Whether they learned from it or repeated it was their choice. As it should be. As it always should have been. 2 weeks after Anos left the city, still hadn't decided what it was becoming. The protests had evolved into town halls, shouting matches that sometimes became conversations. People who'd learned to stay silent were learning to speak again, slowly, with the caution of those who'd been burned before. The regime hadn't collapsed. Superman had appeared publicly, acknowledged what the Phantom Zone had been used for, didn't offer excuses, didn't justify, just stated facts and accepted responsibility. Some people believed him, some didn't. Most were waiting to see what he did next. The insurgency had fragmented, not violently, just naturally. Without a unified enemy, the cracks in their coalition became visible. Different visions of what freedom should look like. Different ideas about how to rebuild. Batman worked between the factions, not leading, coordinating, asking questions instead of providing answers. It was exhausting, frustrating. Nothing like the clean efficiency of a plan executed perfectly. It was also necessary. Constantine sat in a safe house on the edge of the city and didn't drink. The bottles were there, right beside him. He'd bought them 3 times, poured them out 3 times. Fate visited occasionally, checked the wards, made sure Constantine wasn't planning another summoning. The tower was still healing, still vulnerable. One more breach might shatter it permanently. Constantine understood, didn't like it, but understood. He'd caused the crisis, nearly destroyed the world because he couldn't accept slow progress, couldn't trust anything except overwhelming force applied quickly. Anos had called it what it was, desperation masquerading as strategy. Constantine was learning to sit with that, to accept that some problems didn't have fast solutions, that sometimes you had to trust people to figure things out themselves. It was the hardest thing he'd ever done. In the regime's central command, Diana stood before a council that hadn't existed 3 weeks ago. Representatives from different districts, different communities, people who'd been subjects were learning to be citizens again. They had questions, demands, expectations. Diana answered what she could, admitted ignorance when she couldn't, promised to find answers rather than making them up. It felt like losing, like giving up authority, like admitting weakness. It felt necessary. Superman flew patrols still, responded to emergencies, saved people from disasters that had nothing to do with politics or philosophy, but he didn't make decisions for them anymore, didn't impose solutions. When asked what to do, he said he didn't know, suggested they talk to each other, figure it out together. People looked at him strangely when he said that, like he'd become someone they didn't recognize. Maybe he had. The data from the Phantom Zone continued circulating. Names, faces, stories of people who'd been removed from reality for asking the wrong questions, for being inconvenient, for existing in ways the regime found threatening. Some of those people were still in the zone, still trapped in that white void. But Anos's transformation persisted. The zone no longer suspended them in mindless limbo. It held them in a state where they could think. Remember, testify. Recovery teams were being organized. Extraction protocols developed. It would take months, maybe years. But they would bring people back, give them the trials they should have had, the accountability everyone deserved. It was slow, painful, incomplete. It was better than what came before. In the Tower of Fate, Dr. Fate stood at the window that looked onto everything and nothing. The barriers were healing, slowly. The scar from Anos's passage fading like a burn, recovering from heat. The summoning had weakened this world, made it vulnerable. But it had also forced a reckoning, exposed truths that needed exposing, broken systems that needed breaking. Fate wondered if Anos had known that would happen, had calculated the cost and deemed it acceptable, or if he'd simply acted and let the chips fall as they would. Probably the latter. Beings like that didn't calculate. They simply were, and reality adjusted around them. The window showed the city below, the slow work of reconstruction, the painful process of people learning to trust each other again, to believe that tomorrow might be different than yesterday. It wasn't certain, wasn't guaranteed, but it was possible. And possibility, fate understood now, was more valuable than security, more resilient than control, more human than perfection. On a rooftop across the city, a young woman stood with a camera, recording. The regime had destroyed her previous footage, zoned her for distributing it. She'd spent 6 months in that white void before Anos changed it, before she could think again. Remember again, she'd been extracted 3 days ago. Could have left the city. Could have gone somewhere safer, quieter. She came back instead, started recording again, because someone had to, because silence was how tyranny flourished, because Anos had shown them all that the only thing worse than fighting imperfect battles was surrendering before they began. She filmed the town halls, the arguments, the slow, messy work of democracy rebuilding itself. It wasn't dramatic, wasn't exciting, just people talking, disagreeing, trying to find common ground. She filmed it anyway, because this was what mattered, not the fights, not the powers, not the gods and demons and beings from other realms, just people choosing, failing, trying again. The city's lights came on as evening fell. Not the harsh uniform brightness of regime enforcement. Something softer, more varied. The natural light of a place where people made their own decisions about when to work and when to rest. It looked different, felt different, like a city learning to breathe again after years of holding its breath. In a dozen different places, people made choices. Small ones. What to say? Where to go? How to respond to the changes happening around them? None of them knew if it would work. If this fragile rebuilding would hold. If they could create something better than what had been. But they were trying. And in the trying, in the choosing, in the accepting of responsibility and consequence, they were becoming what Anos had challenged them to be. Not subjects, not soldiers, not pieces on someone else's board. Just people. Flawed, uncertain, free. The night deepened. The city continued. The work remained unfinished, as it always would be, as it always should be. Because the moment you decided the work was done, the moment you declared the system perfect, the moment you stopped questioning and accepting and trying, that was the moment you became what you'd fought against. And somewhere beyond sight and dimension and the boundaries of this small, struggling world, a figure with crimson eyes observed and nodded once. They'd learned. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough. Enough to begin. And beginning was all anyone could ever do. The rest was up to them, as it should be.